Greetings, Earth Dweller. You have landed on Renegade Files, your underground connection to paranormal tales, unsolved mysteries, and covert culture. I'm your host, Lex Gordon, broadcasting this encrypted show just for you from the Jungle Villa outpost deep in the uncharted tropics. This is Renegade Files episode 66. 6 obscure but awesome conspiracy theories. Putting together clues is something many analytical and curious people enjoy. Conspiracy theory content has exploded in recent years, and the mainstream media love to ridicule the free thinkers who either produce or consume such content because the media's power and income is based on the idea that they provide the truth and they have all the answers. Therefore, their authority erodes when intelligent researchers prove that so many popular mainstream narratives are falsehoods designed to steer political opinion or to drive action. Since the FCC formally repealed the Fairness Doctrine in 1987, and removed the requirements for media outlets to provide balanced viewpoints of opposing political issues, hardly a single word of unspun, actual truth has escaped a television or a radio. The advent of the internet has provided us with a permanent record. We have the ability to cross-reference what a newscaster or a blue checkmark persona said a year ago compared to yesterday, and much of what results is laughable. As such, conspiracy theories are now taken seriously by believers in truth, or those unplugged from the info machine of the populace. So we all know the big topics in the conspiracy space: the JFK assassination, Watergate, the Iran-Contra affair, the Roswell cover-up, and arguably a few others. But what about the obscure ideas in an already obscure landscape? Or if not obscure, the fringe, the crazy, or the just plain bizarre? Today, that's where we will go, into the uncharted backwaters of the deeply strange, unhinged, and hardcore conspiracy theories that keep the most caffeine-crazed, beautiful mind bulletin board jockeys among us up through the wee hours, where the connections become so convoluted and unlikely that they suddenly all make perfect sense. So, doors locked, blinds closed, VPN activated, and phones in the microwave. Well, unless you're listening to this on your phone. So, in which case, the man already knows who you are, so let's just go for it and get down and dirty as we explore 6 totally bizarre and obscure conspiracy theories. In no order. Number 1. Alex Jones is a CIA agent, or he's actually Bill Hicks. So I would be willing to bet that anyone listening to Renegade Files knows who Alex Jones is, so we'll skip the bio for him. If you don't, look it up and watch a few YouTube videos. If nothing else, he's a divisive figure, and even among conspiracy theorists, there are Alex Jones lovers and haters. I happen to like a lot of what he has done, and I certainly don't believe everything he says, or yells. But I tend to like the guy. Alex Jones has been in the game for a long time. He was on the case at the onset of Waco and Oklahoma City. He has been proven to be right about many things. Then, he was sued by families of a famous shooting after he claimed the event was a hoax, and regardless of what I believe about that incident, I'm pretty suspicious of someone like Alex who gets sued for over $1 billion, but hardly breaks his stride with his own content creation business. It's like that lawsuit didn't faze him, and he just keeps going. I will say, and maybe I'll go into it deeper someday, but anyway, I will say that if you watch some of the drone footage of the incident in question that Alex Jones was sued over, where you see things like kids being led out of one end of the school and back into the other end of the school, dozens of news vans but no police cars or ambulances, portalets set up for the news crew to cover the shooting as it's happening, and photos of some of the staff, like the principal who was allegedly killed there, but then she shows up later at another suspicious event, running in the ill-fated Boston Marathon. I mean, those are just a few observations, and the list is long and crazy. Like that one guy who's laughing until the interview camera comes on, and then he rubs his eyes and starts crying. It is bizarre, and Alex Jones knew it. So he went on a rant and called it as he saw it. Then he gets sued for over $1 billion. And the court, as far as the last time I looked, has basically said he doesn't have to pay it, and he just goes on. It seems like that subject he was sued over is one of those untouchable narratives. You aren't allowed to question it. If you do, you get shadow banned or sued to bits. It's as if, and this is pure speculation, but it feels like the whole lawsuit was just to make an example out of Alex Jones and cool down the momentum of the conspiracy theory culture that had started to grow so fast. Okay, so that's the situation we found Alex Jones in, and then people find and start to pass around the audio from a podcast called The Anthony and Opie Show. This was back in 2013, and on that show, Alex Jones says, quote, am I going to try to do Alex Jones? I don't know. Let's see. Let's try it. We'll edit this out if it doesn't go well. Whenever I go to a family reunion, half the people in the room are former retired CIA. You know what they tell me? They tell me I'm dead on. 100% absolutely right. Okay, we're going to leave that in. I don't know. That might have been a little more Bubba Sparks than Alex Jones. But anyway, love you, Alex. But he does say that whenever he goes to a family reunion, half the people in the room are former retired CIA. That's an odd thing to say, you know, especially when you're a conspiracy theorist icon. Right now, this is seen as a bombshell. But Alex Jones has often mentioned on his own show that his father worked for the CIA. So I don't think him saying that in 2013 is as much of a revelation as some people make it out to be. But either way, it's easy to see why people might think Alex Jones is a CIA operative. And what he does is either limited hangout or disinformation or both. He tells us his father was in the CIA. He said that when he goes to a family reunion, half the people in the room are CIA. Then he gets sued for $1.5 billion, but it doesn't even slow him down. They say he doesn't have to pay it. I mean, those aren't things you hear about the everyday conspiracy theorist, right? And a lot of people think that he's there to give a discredited face to the entire conspiracy theory movement. Now, we've seen things like this before. If you've listened to our episode about the Laurel Canyon conspiracy, that's at the moment our most downloaded episode ever. Go back and check it out. I think it's episode 7. I'm going to look real fast. Yes, I was right. Episode 7. You'd think I would know. Yeah, the Laurel Canyon conspiracy. So I mention that because that's an example of a government operation, allegedly or potentially, where a sort of ugly face was put on a movement that was counter to what the establishment wanted. So the establishment wanted war. There was an anti-war movement, mostly on college campuses, being led by conservative professors and intelligent students. And then all of a sudden, over a summer, you have all these hippies showing up on the news every time someone asks about the war. And you have these sort of counterculture, long hair, you know, grungy, dirty, free love, drug-addled hippies, and they became the voice of the anti-war movement. And it seems, in hindsight, that it is possible that a lot of that was contrived. So go back and check out episode 7, the Laurel Canyon conspiracy, if that's something that interests you. But a lot of people think that Alex Jones is sort of falling into that camp of PSYOP. So they put him out there to be a big, boisterous, sort of oafish character who puts his foot in his mouth all the time, and then they can just align the rest of us with him every time someone utters the word conspiracy theory. He does come off as a crazy caricature when he gets on a rant. but that does seem like a genuine part of his personality. Alex Jones has done so much for such a long time, and he does it all with passion and fire, and anytime you have someone like that in an already controversial space, he's gonna divide some opinions, especially the opinions about who he is and what he really represents. In addition, there's this bizarre conspiracy theory that Alex Jones is actually Bill Hicks, the legendary comedian who died of cancer in 1994. This is built on a few photos that show the men's faces and hands next to each other, and some other shady evidence or coincidences. To me, this feels like either huge stretches or junk conspiracy. They don't even really look alike. And when we get into junk conspiracy territory, we're back to that PSYOP chapter of the book, which is the mainstream sort of floating out some preposterous idea to discredit the legitimate critics of a official narrative. That's just the way that goes. That does happen. We're going to go into that deeper in another episode too. Anyway, stay tuned. So anyway, Alex Jones does not really look even much, a little bit like Bill Hicks maybe, but when you look at those details like the corners of their ears and like little things like their eyebrows, they don't look that much alike. But Alex Jones also had a call-in radio show very early on, right at the end of his time in high school actually, and Bill Hicks wasn't pretending to be Alex Jones on the radio when he was touring and being a huge name in the stand-up comedy world. I honestly don't think Alex Jones and the late comedian Bill Hicks are the same person. So to wrap up the Alex Jones segment, I do like the guy, and I agree with a lot of what he said, but I don't agree with everything he said, and he's been wrong about a few things too, and he would admit that. At the same time, I can only take so much of his style, but that's just because it's not the kind of material I'm always in the mood for. But sometimes, yes. Do I think he's a CIA agent? I'll just say this. I think it's possible. I'm not fully convinced, but I think it's possible. So moving on to number 2, the High Frequency Active Aural Research Program Conspiracy Theory. That's a good title. So on 33 acres in the cold Alaskan mountains, there sits a research facility that studies the far reaches of Earth's atmosphere. The High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, also known as HAARP, is an installation with over 180 antennas. Antennae? Yes, these antennae collect data on atmospheric conditions like the aurora borealis, radio waves, and other atmospheric occurrences. You can see pictures of HAARP with a quick image search, or in the Dark Intel files on Patreon for the helpful supporters who make Renegade files possible there. Check it out for free for a full week. Cancel anytime and help me produce and make the show without ads. And for less money than you would tip a single server for one meal out, you also get bonus episodes, behind the scenes videos at the Jungle Villa Outpost, all the research, transcripts, and background music for every public episode, my bizarre internet finds posts, and the ability to share messages with me and the other RFA agents. So tap the link in the show notes to patreon.com/renegadefiles and help a brother keep making Renegade files for you, fully independent of the man, and we can do this together. Thank you. Cheers. So the HAARP antenna array looks like hundreds of gigantic umbrella frames placed side by side and blanketing basically 33 acres, and it is a creepy sight for sure. HAARP was built as a collaboration between the U.S. Air Force, the Navy, and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA. Its purpose is to study atmospheric conditions, but many believe it's the home to more nefarious programs like controlling the minds and emotions of the population or controlling the weather. The theories surrounding HAARP come from more than one idea. The first is the actual function of the large antenna array. These antennae send out 3.6 megawatt radio signals that travel into the ionosphere in order to purposefully cause a disturbance. These disturbances are then observed and recorded. What could go wrong? According to some, quite a bit. These energy waves are reflected back to Earth at a very low frequency called ELF waves, ELF. ELF waves can have serious effects on things like magnetic fields, emotions, and thoughts. The OSHA website has a page dedicated to the health risks of exposure to ELF radiation. But I read through the studies that those pages link to, and they're mostly inconclusive. For example, one study looked at rates of childhood cancer among those living under high-power power lines that produce ELF radiation, and the rates were about 2% higher than the general public average. But the study had a 2% margin of error, so it's impossible to say if the people who were studied got cancer from the power lines or from some other reason. Another theory is that scientists are able to identify the frequencies of certain emotions, hate, anger, violent impulse, which they are, and that HAARP has the ability to send out those same frequencies, which then reflect back onto the population and can cause things like riots, general unrest, acts of violence. Also, we know that ELF frequencies can have effects on land masses, tectonic plates, and things like that. HAARP is blamed for creating earthquakes, tsunamis, and all kinds of weather. HAARP is also blamed for everything from hurricanes to mind control, and to be honest, there are some very bright people who have passionate opinions on the subject, and I myself haven't dug too deeply into it, so we'll just park that right here. It's possible that I'll do a full episode on HAARP in the future, if I find enough there when I do have a chance to go into it. For now, it just seems like some gigantic bureaucratic weather study thing, and it just looks weird, and that's going to create some conspiracy theories. That's just my humble opinion at a very short glance, and I could be ignorant of what's going on there. Like I said, smart people have passionate opinions about it. Something I should look into, I think. Number 3. Truman Capote wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. So this is a unique one. It's good because it's a theory that may be relatively unknown among the deep conspiracy crowd, but common knowledge among people who are into literature and popular writers. The basic theory of this is that Truman Capote was a famous and accomplished author. He was close friends with Harper Lee. Truman Capote wrote many articles and novels like Breakfast at Tiffany's, Other Voices, and In Cold Blood, which is the book that invented the true crime novel genre. But Harper Lee only ever wrote a single book. At least for about 55 years that was true, and it's arguably true to this day. We'll get into that in a minute. And in the end, she only ever wrote 2. And the first was To Kill a Mockingbird, which was an enormous bestseller and a perennial American classic novel that was also turned into a major motion picture. When I was a kid, we had to watch it in school. The manuscript for her second book was found by a lawyer in her safe deposit box in 2014. That book was Go Set a Watchman, and it was thought to be a sort of sequel to Mockingbird, but it was reworked with extensive changes and published as its own story. And as it is with things like that, there's a lot of controversy surrounding it, a lot of ins and outs. For example, some of those close to Harper Lee say that the manuscript for Go Set a Watchman was actually an early draft of what was to become To Kill a Mockingbird, and that the lawyers took advantage of an elderly Harper Lee and had her sign things she couldn't read or understand, and that it was all to make money off the other famous book. And Harper Lee died soon after that second book came out, so we will probably never really know. But the real conspiracy theory here centers around To Kill a Mockingbird and the question of whether or not Harper Lee or Truman Capote actually wrote the novel. It's also known that editor Tay Hohoff at the publishing company J.B. Lippincott had much to do with the final form of To Kill a Mockingbird. The authorship of both To Kill a Mockingbird and Go Set a Watchman was investigated by 3 Polish academics, Michał Choński, Maciej Edra, and Jan Rybicki. The team employed what is called forensic linguistics and styometry. The authorial fingerprints of Harper Lee, the editor Tay Hohoff, and Truman Capote were contrasted to prove that To Kill a Mockingbird and Go Set a Watchman were both written by the same person. However, their study also suggests that Truman Capote probably helped Lee with writing at least the opening chapters of To Kill a Mockingbird. The study's conclusion that Capote could have written the first few chapters, or did, combined with the fact that Tay Hohoff's hand altered much of that manuscript, at least in a stylistic way, has caused many to believe that Capote had more to do with the novel than Harper Lee would wish to be known. The conspiracy theory persists because Capote wrote so much and Harper Lee wrote so little. And if you believe the associates who say that what became Go Set a Watchman was actually just an early draft of Mockingbird, then you have a situation of someone writing only one book in their entire lifetime, and that book becoming a modern American classic and one of the best-selling books of all time. And this person was friends with a famous, very prolific writer. You can see how this idea grows. But there are other examples of one-hit wonders in the literary world. Some novels written by authors who never published anything else include Black Beauty, Dr. Zhivago, Wuthering Heights, The Catcher in the Rye, and Gone with the Wind, just to name a few. Now, some of those writers died before they could write anything else, and some did write other things, but never at that same level. Harper Lee is unique because she lived a long life and was very well off thanks to her best-selling novel, and was all but begged to write another novel for basically her entire life. In the end, my feeling is that Truman Capote totally helped Harper Lee write Mockingbird, and it's very likely that he wrote quite a bit of it. She was one of Capote's only close friends, and they spent quite a bit of time together, particularly in the years that that book was being created. It's a classic regardless. Number 4. Elvis Lives. There's an interesting phenomenon that happens between members of a society and their most popular or loved celebrities, which is an extended denial following their hero's demise. As we follow the entertainment and promotional appearances of our beloved stars and watch their movies repeatedly, or listen to their songs over and over, we begin to feel like we know them. In a way we do, but not in the same way we know a personal friend. We don't really know these people, but it feels like we do. At the same time, we only ever see them in a film, on a talk show, or hear them singing their hit song on the radio, or their independent underground song on Spotify, and so in some cases, days or weeks may go by when we never see or hear this person who has become so famous. And yet, in the back of our minds, we know they're still there. Until they're not. And it's this combination of illusion of intimacy and the distance between most of us and our pop culture heroes which can cause an extended denial when we do learn of their demise. Unlike times when a close personal acquaintance passes, when a celebrity we love dies, the rest of our life hardly changes, because everything else is exactly the same in our lives. And we have grown accustomed to going for long stretches without seeing or hearing a pop star. There is an illusion that the person is still out there somewhere. Combine this phenomenon of extended denial with the already rich world of celebrity rumors, speculation, enormous wealth, and shady comings and goings, and you have fertile ground for the old "they're still alive" conspiracy theory trope. Now, just because it's a cliche doesn't mean it's never true. So, let's get into some of the big hits in this genre. As I said, arguably the biggest is the perennial notion that Elvis Presley is still alive. Elvis Presley was born in Mississippi in 1935, and by most accounts, he died in Memphis in 1977 when he was 42 years old. Today, Elvis would only be 89. If he were still alive, few people would be happier than my aunt. The idea that Elvis is still alive was heavily fueled by tabloids in the mid and late 80s, when grainy pictures of heavy-set men with sideburns pumping gas were all the rage. Elvis became like an urban Sasquatch, with videos and blurry photos supporting sightings of the elusive king of rock and roll. Aside from the JFK assassination, Elvis Lives was one of the first popular conspiracy theories I remember hearing about as a young man. But it isn't just swooning middle-aged waitresses and Marlboro-puffing motorheads who believe that Elvis endures, and there are a few strange clues that have led to the conspiracy theory gaining traction. The main one is the fact that Elvis's name is misspelled on his headstone. Elvis's grave is marked by a large brass plate inscribed with his full name, the names of his mother, father, and daughter, and a long eulogy written by his father, Vernon Presley, and attributed to Vernon, so Vernon Presley's name is actually on Elvis's headstone twice, which is weird. But weirder still is the fact that Elvis was named Elvis Aaron Presley, with Aaron spelled A-R-O-N on his birth certificate, and he always signed his name as such. But on his eulogized headstone, his middle name is spelled with 2 A's. To me, this is a huge deal. First of all, how is it possible that they misspelled it in the first place? You're talking about not just a famous person, but quite possibly the most famous person to ever live. And they just spelled his name wrong on his grave? And even if someone did make that typo and spell Elvis's middle name wrong on the only physical monument to identify his earthly remains, don't you think that the estate of Elvis Presley could afford to fix it? I mean, geez, it's only the guy's name spelled wrong, and today the Elvis estate is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So the believers argue that the misspelled headstone is evidence that the king lives, because that name does not identify the Elvis we all know, but some poor guy named Elvis Aaron Presley. There are also stories of Elvis being connected to the mob. In some strange tale of his selling a private plane to a mobster, and then the deal went wrong and they were going to kill Elvis over it, so he faked his own death. Elvis also famously met with President Nixon and volunteered to be an informant for the intelligence community to help Nixon wage his war on illicit drugs, for which Nixon gave Elvis a Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs badge. Some claim that Elvis had deep ties to the FBI and CIA, and that these groups may have helped him fake his own death. Someone in his family said that Elvis wanted the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs badge so that he could carry a gun across state lines or into other countries, and he could carry any drugs he wanted and get away with it by flashing the badge. I don't know if that's true. The whole thing is a mystery for sure. God bless the king. Number 5. Next up in the "they're still alive" conspiracy theory category is Tupac Shakur. Tupac was shot on September 7th, 1996 in Las Vegas. But several things have happened since that cause fans to believe he may actually still be alive. For one, no one except the person who was charged with cremating him ever actually saw his dead body, and that person has vanished. For some reason, the person who performed the cremation was paid $3 million cash by Suge Knight, the Death Row Records head, who was with Tupac the night he was shot. And about this man, Suge Knight has said that after he paid him, the man disappeared. And he also said maybe Tupac is dead and maybe he isn't. And that's my paraphrasing, but BET has quoted Suge Knight saying basically this in so many words. But who pays millions of dollars to cremate someone? That's just weird. There's also a famous photo of Knight driving a car and Tupac in the passenger seat, and the photo has one of those digital dates on the bottom right, and the date is September 8, 1996, which is the day after Tupac was allegedly shot and killed. Okay, that could be a lot of things. It could have been taken after midnight and the time affected the date of the camera or something like that. The time could have been set in some other time zone, or it could have been photoshopped in. People say it was before you could do things like that, but not really. I think the first version of Photoshop shipped around 1990. So 6 years before the Tupac photo in question, Photoshop was definitely popular by 1996. And putting an orange digital date onto the black section of the bottom right of a photograph is a perfect example of the kind of thing that could have been done pretty convincingly back then. Still, the photo casts another clue about Tupac being alive into the basket for sure. Also, Tupac Shakur had a history of starting rumors about his own death, or weaving death symbolism into his creation. His album called The Don Killuminati, The 7-Day Theory, was released after his death, and that's Killuminati, like a combination of the word kill and Illuminati. The cover of that shows Tupac dressed as Jesus, and we know the story of Jesus being resurrected 7 days after his death, and the album is subtitled The 7-Day Theory. In his 1996 song, Ain't Hard to Find, one line says, quote, "I heard a rumor that I died, murdered in cold blood, traumatized. Pictures of me in my final states. You know, mama cried, but that was fiction. Some coward got the story twisted." End quote. Also, adding to the theories that he never died is the fact that since his supposed fatal shooting, 9 full Tupac albums have been released. How did he have time to write and record 7 albums worth of material when he only released 4 in his lifetime before he was shot, and those 4 took 5 years? I guess some of those new albums are kind of like greatest hits types albums, but it still fuels the speculation. And then we have a terminally ill policeman, David Myers, who swears he helped Tupac fake his own death, and that others were involved, including Tupac himself, who Myers says paid someone $50,000 to deliver another body to the morgue, which does align with the cremation guy disappearing. The whole Tupac thing has been speculated about from day one. It's a classic case of the fans wandering across a wide range of fishy circumstances, and his death never quite making sense from any angle. There are other public figures who people have said never truly died the way we were told, if they died at all. Such theories include Hitler escaping to South America, Marilyn Monroe faking her own death, John McAfee. John deserves a dedicated episode himself, and Jeffrey Epstein. Well, I mean, Epstein is in another category all his own. We all watched that unfold in real time. I knew about Epstein from way back when I had done research on the Clintons, and I knew Bill had gone to Epstein's Island multiple times when he was president. But back then, no one actually really knew what Epstein's Island was all about. There were rumors, and in a way, that's all we have still. But we do know for sure that Bill Clinton was on Epstein's jet at least 11 times, with flight records showing him flying the Lolita Express more like 26 times. And that Epstein was allegedly running some sketchy videotaping blackmail scheme targeting high-power elites. What could go wrong with that, right? And yes, you're right, Epstein does not belong in an episode about obscure conspiracy theories, so we will dive into all of that subject some other day. Epstein didn't kill himself. But I do have to say this. Epstein didn't kill himself. So the old idea that someone faked their death is always good conspiracy theory territory. So now we come to the last entry in our 6 crazy conspiracy theories, which is Number 6, John Titor, time traveler. The story of John Titor, that's Titor, is fascinating on multiple levels. First of all, this was a story that unfolded and took shape almost completely online, and at the time, that was a cool thing. This was back in 2000 and 2001. A person posting under the name time_travel_0 began writing short messages on a message board forum called the Time Travel Institute. That forum is still up and running, and it's well worth a rainy day dig through the topics and posts there, and there are cool discussions about all things time travel. The Time Travel Institute forum even has a sub-forum dedicated entirely to John Titor, which is described as a place to discuss John Titor's intriguing narratives and timelines, unravel mysteries, and engage in debates about his theories, while providing a space for both enthusiasts and skeptics to connect and delve into the legacy of one of the most discussed purported time travelers. And that's a description right from the subforum. So back in 2000, posts started to appear on this message board where Time Travel 0 claimed to be an American soldier from the year 2036. He said he was based in Tampa, Florida. He claimed he had been assigned to a governmental time travel project, and his mission was to travel back to 1975 and retrieve an IBM 5100 computer that was needed to debug various legacy computer programs that still existed in 2036. So right away, some savvy computer people deduced that part of the problem Titor was trying to resolve had something to do with what they call Y2K38, which is a more complex version of the Y2K issue, which we know turned out to be nothing. More on that later. But the gist of the Y2K38 thing is that computers using Unix timecode are unable to process dates past the year 2038. And believe me, that is the short version description of what's going on there. But I guess since the IBM 5100 runs the APL and BASIC programming, it can somehow be used to process data beyond the Unix limitation of 2038, and at least as far as dates are concerned, and we're not going to worry too much more about all of that right now. So in addition to his mission to find and bring back an IBM 5100, Titor said he had been chosen for the mission because his grandfather had been involved in developing the 5100, and he posted some deep technical specs about the machine as proof of this, which I'm not sure how that proves anything. I'm also not sure why it matters that his grandfather helped make the 5100. My grandfather was in the 101st Airborne Division in World War II. That doesn't make me a soldier. But either way, Titor's posts were off and running, and the entire thing gained traction because he seemed to have some pretty good answers when the people on the time travel forum started grilling him. Titor also told those who asked about UFOs that UFOs were still unexplained in his time, so in 2036, and he said he thought that UFOs and what we call extraterrestrials might be time travelers with superior time machines from much further into the future than 2036. And right away we're into some time travel arguments, because if you can time travel and somebody in the future beyond 2036 has a better time machine than you, why don't you just jump forward to where they are and get the schematics and build a better one for yourself? And then we come into all these circular time travel things. You see how quickly that goes. So as the posts progressed, though, things got really weird, or cool depending on how you look at it. People started asking him about his time machine, as you do. I mean, that's where you start, right? I mean, you're a time traveler, you're here now, you came in a time machine, so where is it? What's it look like? How do you make one? Post a picture of it. So he made more than one post describing the machine, and he was consistent. He also said the time machine had 6 main components. He described it as a stationary mass, a temporal displacement unit powered by 2 topspin dual positive singularities, and producing a standard offset Tipler sinusoid. He said the 6 components of the time machine were 2 magnetic housings for the dual microsingularities, an electron injection manifold to alter mass and gravity of the microsingularities, a cooling and X-ray venting system, gravity sensors or a variable gravity lock, 4 main cesium clocks, and 3 main computer units. Tidor said the time travel device was installed in the rear of a 1966 Chevrolet Corvette convertible. Bitchin'. Later posts mentioned a 1987 four-wheel drive truck of some kind, maybe a Jeep. I remember seeing some pictures of this time machine Corvette somewhere, but I don't know if those were pictures that Tidor posted or if those were pictures someone else made trying to replicate what his time machine might look like. So the story goes that after collecting the IBM 5100, Tidor then traveled to the year 2000 because he wanted to visit his family and his younger self, and to see the effects of the Y2K bug. Yeah, that seems weird, right? There is a story that Tidor sent faxes to the Art Bell show in 1998 saying the Millennium bug would cause chaos. That was the Y2K thing. But when asked on the bulletin boards why this had not happened, he said that he had intervened to prevent it. Right? He fixed the Y2K bug. Thank you, John Titor. Speaking of the late great Art Bell, the John Titor story really picked up steam when he started posting those faxes on Art Bell's bulletin board page, or faxing them to his show, I'm not sure. Art Bell loved the subject of time travel. Art Bell read the faxes sent to him by Tidor on the air, and this prompted many discussions on the online forums, and the whole thing really blew up. Unfortunately, the name John Titor has become a keyword for ranking online searches for time travel stuff, so there are many Art Bell videos of his old shows that people have posted with the name John Titor in the video title, and the radio shows posted there have nothing to do with John Titor besides being old Art Bell shows about time travel. That's just another layer of confusion on the modern internet. It's crazy out there. Art Bell is a legend. But much of what Titor said never happened, and defenders of the story say that his arriving here altered the space-time continuum so that things changed here and there compared to the future we knew, but Titor did have a few greatest hits. He answered a question someone asked about an invention named Ginger, saying it was some kind of motorized scooter. This is pretty interesting because Ginger was the code name for the Segway scooter, and Titor seemed to know about it before it was revealed. So he answered that question 2.5 hours after it was asked, and 11 months before it was officially released to the public, so that's pretty good. Not only that, according to a lengthy article called The Confirmed Hoax Fallacy, published on the Temporal Recon Substack, that attempts to debunk the Titor debunkers. The author tells us, quote, "You can't find this statement about Ginger online anywhere anymore. It has been scrubbed from online sources everywhere." And to be fair, he's right. I couldn't find it. The only place I found it was in his article. So, they say that he predicted the wireless internet also, because he said his friend in the future of 2036 worked on wireless internet nodes. And this was in 2000 or 2000, as Duck Dodgers would say, before Wi-Fi was widespread. Okay, so a lot of people predicted Wi-Fi. Titor also told us about YouTube, some say. His exact quote was, "There is an entertainment industry. Again, it's very decentralized. The technology to express yourself with video is so readily available that many people do it all by themselves or in small groups. Much of the distribution is over the web." That's not a bad prediction, but why didn't he just call it YouTube if it really was from the future and he knew about YouTube? It could be argued that he predicted voice over internet protocols also, because he said we would use the internet to communicate. Those are kind of stretches. He did tell us about a poem named A Soldier's Winter that he recited a few lines from, and that poem wouldn't be written for several years. But like so many things where this topic is woven into, a strange, malleable internet exists. It's almost impossible to find a firm timeline of this poem, and some say Tidor wrote the whole thing. Then we have another poem with the same title, and it gets pretty muddy when you try to figure it all out. He asked a poster if they were really surprised that Iraq would have nuclear weapons in the future, or if they thought it might be just a fake news story to convince people to go to war. And this was before the whole weapons of mass destruction rhetoric that helped launch the Gulf War. So he did nail that one. But those are the kind of vague things. If he really knew about it, why wouldn't he just say George Bush would use the rhetoric of weapons of mass destruction to launch a Gulf War? Right? All these generalities, you know? He also said that his time machine used an optical reader for the atomic clock, and that it was much more reliable than the old radio versions, and we have since updated the atomic clocks to use optical readers, and that's another solid hit for Tidor. Now, real quick before we wrap this up, I want to point out one last thing about his time machine specs. He says it contains 2 microsingularities. Microsingularity is another word for what we call a mini black hole. And Stephen Hawking has speculated that the minimum density for a mini black hole would be about 10 to the 16 kilograms. And Tidor says his time machine had 2 of these in the back of an old Corvette. That would make his 66 Stingray weigh about 20 trillion pounds. And that's just me rounding things off and guessing through some pretty gnarly math that I'm not going to go into right now, and it's possible that I'm off, but suffice it to say, this would be one seriously heavy Corvette. Tidor always said he wouldn't answer any questions that would help people make money. Like, what horse won the Kentucky Derby, or what were the stock prices of this or that stock in the future. But one thing I always come back to on the John Tidor story is this. If he really was a time-traveling soldier from the year 2036, sent back to gather an old computer and take it back to save the future, would he really spend a few years kicking around on the geek message boards of the day, talking trash with anyone who logged on, and telling them all about his devices and the secret military mission he was on? And even if he would, he spent a lot of time writing and faxing and trying to convince people he was telling the truth. Why not just drive your time machine Corvette to a TV station and show us how it works on the air? Let them film you going forward in time by a few days and bring back a newspaper. Maybe just the weather section if you're so worried about a stock fraud. And that's another thing. You're telling me he wouldn't set up an E-Trade account for himself back in 2000 and take the username and password back to 2036 when he went? Buy a few thousand shares of Apple and be a billionaire when he gets back? He visited himself in 2001 and he didn't say, hey bro, in 10 years buy 1,000 Bitcoin for $3 each and keep most of it until at least 2024. Right? Maybe he did. Maybe he's a Bitcoin whale now. This also leads us into a huge list of famous time travel paradoxes, like the grandparent paradox, which says if you go back in time and for some insane reason kill your infant grandfather, then you could never have been born. If you were never born, then you could never go back in time to kill your young grandfather, so he would live and you would be born. So you could go back in time and on and on and on. Or what if you put a ball into a wormhole that curves back and exits at its own entrance but in the past, and the ball rolls out into the past and knocks its own previous version of itself out of the way so it doesn't enter the wormhole? What happens to the ball? That's a good one. And then we have the old time travel will never be invented because if it is, in some distant future, we would already know because we would come back here, and this is a big one. Now, some would argue that this has happened and that time travelers are among us. You see those pictures of like people in the 30s looking at smartphones or whatever? There's some good ones of those. We're not going to go into much of that here. This might be a fun Patreon bonus episode. Help me make the show at patreon.com/renegadefiles, and you know the drill. And thank you to those who already do. You guys rock. The RFA agents on Patreon make the show work. You can help them and you can help me. Go to patreon.com/renegadefiles. You can do it for free for a week. Shake and bake. And when you start having these kinds of late night lava lamp conversations about the paradoxes of time travel, the John Titor story sort of falls into all of the other time traveler tales we've heard in the strange corners of the Fortean world. But it's hard to overstate just how much of an uproar the John Titor thing caused online. This happened at a magical time on the internet. It wasn't technically the beginning of the internet, but it was the early days of the internet really coming alive. Google was just becoming a household name. We still had MySpace, and some college kids knew about Facebook. Napster and iTunes were fighting it out, but people still used fax machines, and Art Bell and Coast to Coast AM was the major hub for many of us interested in weird things. The message boards were discussing serious things and were yet to be overrun with trolls or feds. John Titor engaged the skeptics, and he had a lot of answers, and much of it turned out to be correct, but much of it did not. But at the time, it was a lively debate, and it seemed like everyone online had an opinion about Titor or time travel in general. And for a few years, this was a really big deal, in an underground sort of way.
Underground.
There's also a thread running through this story that makes claims that the entire Titor story was a hoax, perpetrated by some entertainment lawyer and maybe his brother or something. I glanced into it. It's possible that they were the guys behind it. If they were, that's greasy. And here's my super short summary. Thank you so much for exploring these 6 obscure but awesome conspiracy theories with me today. We might call that 6 shallow dives. Doing that was really fun. This gives us a lot to think about and some good material to maybe dive deeper into the future, so stay tuned to Renegade Files. I am so glad to have you in the Renegade Files crew. Stay classy, and be sure to check out our merchandise through the link in the show notes and from our website at therenegadefiles.com. You can get hats, shirts, and coffee mugs to get your morning going, or to keep you awake all night reading articles about the Lemurian humanoids who live in the tunnels under Washington, D.C. You can find that gear and much more in our merch shop, and represent Renegade Files on the streets. Thank you so much. Until our next adventure, I'm your host, Lex Gordon. Stay wild, gigawatt child.